After trains and coaches are decommissioned and are waiting to be scrapped, they are gathered together in a large section of unused railway tracks that come to be known as train graveyards. For urban explorers, they are a fascinating place to investigate, as there is so much history and old-fashioned machinery to be studied. Some of the graveyards are well-known tourist attractions and open to the public. They're allowed to walk through the train cars and sit down inside the locomotives, but most are more off of the grid, remote, forgotten, and extremely unsettling. Up in the region of Canada where I live, there is one such place. If you're willing to endure a few miles of hiking through the woods over uneven terrain, the trees open up to reveal an abandoned railway yard, with hundreds of older-style cars and engines compacted closely together, up and down the tracks. Everything is overgrown, with tall grass and small trees growing up from underneath the cars, and most of them are heavily weather-beaten and graffitied. Standing on the platform always gives you a sense of cold fascination because of how crowded the tracks are, yet how quiet it is. It's literally as close to standing in a ghost town as you can get. I would usually hike up there in late spring, when the snow is mostly gone, and wander around and detach myself from society. I would sketch the landscape sometime in my pad, or just stroll up and down the cars looking for lost treasures. Last time I was up there was a few weeks ago. It was late summer, which normally isn't when I choose to visit the station, because of how hot it was. But I decided to break with tradition and make the hike one last time before the snow started. As I wandered down the railway tracks, casually dragging my fingers against the cars as I went, I noticed fresh fragments of glass on the ground. One of the safety glass windows in the car had been broken and was bent outwards. Curious as to what had caused the damage, I entered the train car and walked down the aisles. At the very end of the car, I noticed a sleeping bag and several empty food cans and wine bottles. Figuring a homeless person had made their home here, I decided to leave without touching anything. As I was exiting, I noticed a hole in the back of one of the seats. I bent over to have a better look. Something had punched a hole clean through the seat and traveled into the seat in front of it. I stood back straight up and continued glancing through the car. I spotted at least 5 fresh holes in the ceiling, the walls, and other seats. I glanced back at the broken window. Had someone fired a gun down this direction of the train, and then in a panic, climbed out through the opening in the window? I stood there about 2 or 3 minutes, in silence, just looking around at the damage, trying to solve the puzzle that was before me. Maybe 2 homeless people were fighting over territory? I sat down in one of the old train seats, and dug through my bag for my phone. I was going to power it up and start taking pictures of what I saw, when I felt the faintest of chills, when I heard a voice whisper directly in my ear, "Get away." I leapt up to my feet in an instant, and actually spoke aloud. No fucking way! I glanced around in every direction, and pulled out my hunting knife. I raised the knife, and was frantically looking around, but there was absolutely no one there. I caught a glimpse of my hand, and noticed how badly I was shaking. I swear by anything you want me to swear on, what happened next is the truth. Something shoved me in the chest, and again I heard someone speak directly into my ear. "Get away." I booked it. I ran out of the car and sprinted directly into the trees. I circled back and hid behind a tree to watch the car from what I thought was a safe vantage point. I didn't see anyone exit the train after me. There wasn't movement of any kind. Thoroughly shaken, I took the long way back around the station and headed back to the path that would take me home. I was already trying to convince myself that I had hallucinated the whole thing, and by no means was I ever going to tell anyone about it. The train station was still in sight when I paused. I took out my phone and began powering it on. I was going to record a video of myself explaining what had just happened, and get a sense of how scared I looked, when, again, nothing but the truth. I heard footsteps coming up the path behind me. I paused, and maybe for about 15 to 20 seconds, I didn't make a sound. Then, the voice came again, though this time it was not in my ear. A voice screamed at me from down the path.
Get away!
I had never heard a voice so hollow yet so furious. I sprinted up the path for as long as I could, before I had to stop and catch my breath. I've been alive for more than 40 years, and I never recall being as scared as I was in that moment. Tone of voice can give a lot away. You can tell when someone is trying to scare you, and when someone is getting ready to hurt you. By the tone of the voice just then, it most definitely felt like the latter. I haven't been back to that station since, and to be honest, I really don't want to. I'm not even sure I could easily locate the exact car where I heard the whispers. I can only speculate as to what happened in that car. But my guess is someone tried to sleep in there, and during the night, the voice came and tried to get them to leave. The sleeping person, in a blind panic, likely fired some shots from a weapon, and then crawled out of the window in terror. If the voice had sounded like it did on the path, except in the dark, I likely would have reacted in that same way. "12 years ago, when I was 20, I had been married for 2 years and had 2 kids. I was a stay-at-home mom, and my husband worked as a landscaper. We lived in a double-wide modular home. One night I was home alone because the kids were visiting their grandmother, and I decided to relax and watch a movie. Our home was about a mile away from the nearest neighbor. It rested atop a large hill that was surrounded by a dense forest. I had barely started the movie when I heard what sounded like a kitten meowing outside.
Meow. Meow.
I got up and decided to investigate. I went outside and immediately noticed something wasn't right. The meowing sounded like it was coming from about 20 feet up in a large oak tree. When I walked over and stood directly underneath the branches, the meowing turned into a deep growling. Not like a dog, but someone pretending to be a dog. It was too dark out to see anything clearly. Deeply unsettled by this, I went back inside and locked the door. While I contemplated whether or not I would be overreacting by calling the cops, I heard a loud boom on my roof, followed by the most insane high-pitched scream I had ever heard. I covered my ears, ran to the bedroom and grabbed the shotgun. I was shaking with fear because I knew something or someone was intentionally trying to scare me, and it wasn't normal. You could just feel it in the air, that something was different. I called my husband at work, and just as he answered, the screech started again, only deeper and longer. He told me to hang up and call the police, but I knew they wouldn't be out there for at least an hour. So instead, I decided to stand facing the bay window with the shotgun up and ready. After a few moments, what looked like an emaciated teenager jumped down in front of the window, facing my direction. He had completely white glowing eyes, as well as white hair, and extremely pale skin. He looked up as if he was sniffing the air. Then he growled while glaring at me. His eyes seemed to get brighter as he did so. After another moment, he opened his mouth and revealed what appeared to be a forked tongue. Before I could even process what I was looking at, I heard more footsteps on the roof, and a smaller girl that looked just like him jumped down from above, also looking directly at me with glowing white eyes. I instinctively cocked back the hammer on the shotgun. I didn't want to shoot through the window if I could help it, but I wasn't going to let them get in. They pressed their faces to the window, and all I could think about was how silent it was all of a sudden, and how pulling the trigger would break the silence. I'm not sure how long we locked eyes, but I suddenly noticed a pair of headlights coming up the driveway, and I recognized my husband's car. I wanted to scream out to him not to get out of the car, but before I could even open my mouth, both white-eyed children leapt off of the roof and into the darkness. My husband never caught a glimpse of them, and ultimately didn't believe me. His mother did, and confided in me that she had seen them before. She believed that they were some kind of demon. Over the next few years before we moved away, I would occasionally hear meowing from the trees around my house at night, but I would never go out to investigate. I'm not sure what they were, but paranormal or not, I don't ever want to find out what they wanted from me. I'm a former employee of New York's Palace Theater in Times Square. To summarize, I worked as a lighting technician and stagehand, and I can tell you with absolute certainty that the theater is very haunted. I know that's not exactly breaking news. The theater was built back in 1913, and it has a long history of unexplainable occurrences and ghostly sightings. Even today, in 2018, the advertisements claim it to be haunted by more than 100 spirits, both of previous performers and employees. I'm not sure how anyone can accurately judge that, given that any ghosts that reside there are never going to line up for a roll call. But regardless of how many there are, I can say with certainty that there is at least one, and he is very angry. I had a friend who used to work in the theater as a sound technician and would frequently sit in or near the orchestra pit during performances. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with this place, the most well-known celebrity spirit that supposedly haunts the palace is Judy Garland, most well known as Dorothy from the 1939 film The Wizard of Oz. That never made much sense to me, as she didn't die in the theater. In fact, she didn't even die in New York. But the theory goes that because she gave her last live performance in the theater in 1967, her spirit was drawn back to it because of the overwhelming sensation of feeling alive and happy there on stage. There was a door built especially for Garland in the orchestra pit for her to enter and exit the stage. My friend is one of several dozen people who have reported seeing her standing there during a live show. Normally it's just a, "I caught her out of the corner of my eye" kind of thing, but according to my friend, he had turned his head and made direct eye contact with her. She made an apologetic face as if to say, "Oh, I'm not on yet," then disappeared back through the open doorway. He said he was so shaken he collapsed into his seat and was unable to calm his breathing for several minutes. Now, as for my own accounts, I never saw Judy Garland or anyone else I recognized as a golden age film star. But I did see many figures walking up and down the aisles out of the corner of my eye. It happened so often that I stopped asking my coworkers if they had seen anything. I would just get used to it and ignore it. In fact, I recently went back to the theater in early 2017 with one of my friends to show him around. When we were under the stage, I caught movement of something walking alongside us out of my peripheral vision, but I wasn't even surprised or alarmed enough to turn my head. Back in 2010, I had one of the most heart-stopping experiences. It was late at night after hours. There were maybe 6 of us in the entire theater. The doors were all locked and most of the lights were out. I was up on one of the balconies immediately off stage. I had my radio in one hand and was speaking to my partner in the lighting booth. As he was adjusting the lighting on stage, I was getting a sense of how the show would look from this angle. The last thing a paying customer wanted was a light that was slightly out of focus and shining directly in their eye, or having something bright and shiny reflecting off the stage back at them. I stupidly had one foot up on the balcony railing and was mentally counting the lights, running down a checklist in my head. I was then violently shoved from behind. I distinctively remember 2 hands shoving me hard with the intention of knocking me forward over the balcony. Because of the position my body was in, I jolted forward kind of sideways and fell over on my side on the balcony, but not before my radio went flying over the edge into the viewing gallery below. As soon as I hit the balcony, there came a deafening scream from somewhere in the catwalks above the stage. The lights flickered, and over the radio I heard my friend in the lighting booth yell, "What on earth was that?" I jumped up, much more shaken than hurt. I ran downstairs and across the aisles until I found my radio. Everyone was frantically calling my name over and over, apparently unsure of what happened to me. When I checked in, they all asked who had screamed, and I replied that I had no idea. but that someone had just tried to shove me off of the balcony. We all then met in the security room and spent more than an hour playing back footage from multiple viewpoints, but we never caught a glimpse of a ghostly apparition. I have no idea what happened that night. I know that one of the ghosts that supposedly haunts the theater was a tightrope walker who fell to his death during a performance. That might explain the screaming, but not the shoving. I know the palace is a major tourist attraction, and I don't want to dissuade anyone from visiting there, but please be aware that after buying a ticket, you may just experience more than you bargained for.
There's always a reason.